Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Irene Vilar, who's a Puerto Rican from Arecibo, Puerto Rico. Her memoirs, her memoir, The Latest Gallery from Other Press 2009, originally published in 1996, was a Philadelphia Inquirer and Detroit Free Press Notable Book of the Year. The memoir was featured in National Public Radio, Fresh Air, Univision, CBS, PBS La Plaza, Vogue Magazine, New York Times Magazine, and the arts front page section of the New York Times. Quite an accomplishment. Vilar has worked as acquisition or service editor for women's and Jewish studies at Syracuse University Press, the American Book Series published by the University of Wisconsin Press, and now at Americas at Texas Tech University Press. She's also a literary agent for Vilar Creative Agency and Ray Good Martin Literary Agency, specializing in Spanish, Latin American, and Portuguese authors. We also have, as a co-presenter, Tamara Goldmeyer. Googlemeyer. Yeah, it was her name.
It's hard, it's okay.
Googlemeyer, it's not hard. It's just this accent thing. Okay. She's the executive director of Sister Horse Global Institute. They're celebrating the 25th anniversary. It's an international women's organization, and it's our real pleasure to kick off this semester with such great distinguished presenters. Gracias. And at the end stage, we'll have some refreshment and we'll talk and catch up. Hola. You made it?
Well, thank you all for being here. I think I'm going to say a few words first, and I'll try to keep my statements brief because Irene's story is a compelling one, and I'd like you to have the opportunity to hear from her specifically. I'm not good with mics because I'm very sort of active, so bear with me as I fade in and out, but I understand we're taping, so I'll try to behave myself. And also, I'm reading from notes today. I don't usually do that, but Irene's story is an important one, and it has the possibility of being misunderstood. So I wanted to be very clear and concise and careful in my comments. So don't mind me too much. And again, to the center, thank you for hosting us so warmly. We do appreciate it. To all of those of you who've come to hear Irene's story and to support her telling of it, which is very important.
Hola, welcome.
I love you. So a few more guests. But I'll start again. To all of you who've come to hear Irene's story, thank you, and to support the telling of it, which is very personal, and again, very important, thank you. Women's stories are rarely simple, linear events. On the contrary, they're often quite complex and complicated, and the telling of them is easier when there are good friends gathered around. So we appreciate all of you being here today. As was mentioned earlier, I'm Tamara Googlemeyer. I'm Executive Director of the Sisterhood Global Institute, about which you can find more information over there, and also from our website, www.sigi.org, which is SIGI. We are celebrating our 25th anniversary of International Women's Human Rights, and we've supported the telling of women's stories with all of their complexities for those 25 years. So it's something we're very proud about. Irene's is one of those stories. It's at once unique and on a very cellular level, very familiar as well. Just a quick side note, my copy of Impossible Motherhood arrived late one afternoon, and I resisted picking it up and thumbing through it. And I put it on a stack of papers next to my computer. And I looked at it occasionally throughout the day, but I resisted. And about midnight, I picked it up, which actually turned out to be a very unwise decision, because at 4 a.m. in the morning, I looked up and realized that I had devoured half of the book. I was completely surprised, honestly, at how compelling it was and how much it resonated with me on a personal and sort of sociological level. Again, it's one that I think is difficult, even though my history and my experiences are different than Irene's. There's much that's the same. There's a life that's lived negotiating patriarchal institutions. There are constrictive views of what women can and should accomplish in this world. And there's also the reality of living through and moving beyond impossible choices. So that's what we're here to talk about today. As the first line of Robin Morgan's foreword starkly declares, Irene Vilar had 15 abortions in 15 years. That is the reality of Irene's story, but it's only a partial reality. To uncover the larger truth meaning of Irene's experiences, both those she inflicted on herself and those that were inflicted on her, you have to dig very deep, but it's worth doing. So I hope you all will take a copy of Irene's book, find a copy of it, and read it. As with most stories, context is everything. Irene's story takes place against, I'm paraphrasing a bit here, the densely layered backdrop of patriarchy in the home and the state, racism, colonialism, and neo-colonialism, and a tradition of secrecy. Irene was a 16-year-old college student having an intimate relationship with her 50-year-old professor. To steal Robin's phrase, he was a great man through which she might hope to become a great woman. From the beginning, Irene butted up against the constraints of this relationship and a negotiated self, and multiple pregnancies became the form and shape and language of her revolt. Hers is a story that sits at the nexus of male power and female rebellion. Robin Morgan sees women's bodies as colonized lands, and she says our own bodies have been taken from us, mined for their natural resources, sex, children, and labor, and alienated or mystified, whether as stereotypical virgin or a mother. It follows that as women, to reclaim our lives, we must reclaim our very flesh. Irene's is a difficult story to tell, and she could have chosen to remain silent. Understandably so. I don't think there are many who take on the daunting task of telling this very personal story. So for that, I applaud her. Irene says, in fact, for years it didn't occur to me that there was anything to tell about abortion. Quite the opposite, there was much to forget. And I think that many women who have had abortions feel that very same way, regardless of the number. The simple fact, however, is that when we remain silent, women suffer, and ultimately women die. So in terms of some worldwide context for this story and discussion here tonight, an estimated 5 million women are hospitalized each year due to abortion-related complications. These complications result in 13%, or 67,000 deaths each year, almost all of which occur in developing countries. More than 95% of the abortions performed in Africa and Latin America, and 60% performed in Asia are classified as unsafe abortions, i.e. performed in illegal circumstances, often seeking women to find alternative means that aren't legally sanctioned, and therefore usually very unsafe. As Irene points out, there are 4 million abortions performed in Latin America each year, and in a region with some of the most stringent abortion laws, there is a correspondingly high rate of abortions, 40 per 1,000 women of childbearing age. As a result of unsafe abortions, 5,000 women die each year in Latin America alone. In Mexico, a country that severely restricts access to abortion, there is an abortion rate of 33, and in 2006, almost 150,000 women were hospitalized from abortion-related complications. So this takes a huge toll on society. In Nigeria, where abortion is permitted only to save the life of the woman, 750,000 women have abortions every year. 25% of those, or 1 in 4, experience serious complications, contributing to Nigeria's high maternal mortality rate. In Nigeria, 8 women die for every 1,000 children that are born. In Uganda, another place, in Africa, unsafe abortions are the leading cause of maternal death, accounting for 1 in 5, or 21% of all maternal deaths. In Southeast Asia, where abortion is highly restricted, deaths from unsafe abortions account for 14 to 16% of all maternal deaths. And here in the U.S., 22% of all pregnancies end in abortion, yet fewer than 0.3% of abortion patients experience a complication that requires hospitalization. The this is primarily because abortion is both legal and widely generally available. And also, finally, a rare success story. In South Africa, in 1996, it liberalized its abortion law, and within months, the infection rate due to unsafe abortion fell by half, and maternal deaths plummeted by 91%, which is a staggering statistic. So, as Irene points out, this isn't a story about abortion, it's about the consequences of, and I would say, rage of being silenced and remaining silent. But interestingly, the way she expressed her rage took direct aim at those who use control of women's bodies to control women themselves. It's the very embodiment of the saying, the personal is political. Whether meaning to or not, Impossible Motherhood forces us to look directly at abortion, to confront our uneasy relationship with it. It's one of the last, what I call paper tigers. One that even those of us in the women's movement have yet to fully declaw. It is a lived experience shared by millions of women that we rarely examine or talk about beyond the polarized identifiers of either for or against. And it's simply not possible to read Impossible Motherhood and think or talk about, experience, or live with abortion in the same way. As a young girl, Irene watched her mother come undone, then she systematically repeated the process, undoing herself. The difference is that she put herself back together again. We're very glad. Irene's is a compelling story. Hers is an unforgettable voice, and Impossible Motherhood is a beautifully written book, truly a beautifully written book. At Sisterhoodist level, we're happy to support her unique voice and the voices of countless women around the world. So please, with that, I will turn it over to Irene to help me unlock her.
Thank you so much. That was so kind of you. And forgive me for my voice. Today is the first day I got it back. I lost it on Monday as I got into the airplane. I had prepared all weekend saying, I can do this. I will do it. I must do it. I have to put a face to this book. And I had debated. I had refused to do a book tour, but I felt that there had to be something symbolic, as a presentation of the book. But then I went back and forth, and over the weekend I said, I can do this, and I went to it. And I got into the airplane, and my voice was gone. So talk about the ways our bodies speak. So I think what I'll do, because this is a book really about, that really requires a discussion. What I'm going to do is just read a little for 5 minutes, as much as my voice allows, and then we'll just talk. I want to thank Centro in Tamara and CD. These are two institutions that I admire for a long, long time. And I feel privileged and honored to be part of the history, their own history of creating understanding and empathy across cultural and gender divides. And I think that this book ultimately attempts to do that. The subtitle is My Achilles Heel, Testimony of an Abortion Addict. Everybody tells me, well, were you addicted to abortion? Were you addicted to terminations? And really, no. I was somehow addicted to the high in pregnancy. And abortion was the downside. So I could have subtitled the book, Testimony of a Pregnancy Addict. But really, that did not convey the power of the drama that I staged. And I also wanted to politicize my body and my womb. So I needed to call it a testimony, and I needed to really own the abortion side. Because there I was forced to become accountable as I explored my actions, my destructiveness. And that was the only way that I felt I could turn the intimate into something that was worth becoming public. Everybody asks why, are there some stories that should remain silent, And so that was one of the questions I debated. And in order to justify this, shift from the private to the public, I needed to own that addiction, that abortion part, knowing that I was going to be faced, in this country, in this country that is so divided over abortion, perhaps the most divisive and inflammatory subject in this country, I know that if I chose that subtitle, the book was fated to be misunderstood if it wasn't read. But it was a risk worth taking. So, having said that, I'm going to read what I call the chapter of understanding, which is it's towards the end. Book also was an experiment in a field, a science method that I'm in love with. It's called psychohistory. It's not a very popular field. It's sort of it has been cast away by the social sciences, but it's a very, very meticulous and rigorous approach at looking at the connecting vessels between the personal and the global and the political. And it's really, it asks the question of why to history. And it views our bodies, ourselves, our own versions of who we are and what we are, the lies we tell ourselves as we grow up. Sees those as really the texture of history. It doesn't come from history to the personal, but it goes from the personal to the historical. So in this chapter that I call the chapter of understanding, it is an attempt at bringing that together. My mother was a volume. Hello. My mother, there we go. Perfect. My mother was a volume addict, and my father was addicted to alcohol and gambling. Two of my brothers were heroin addicts. If my body was my perspective on the world, then it was a battleground of hopefulness and hopelessness and fear, just like my brothers. As early as that summer of my 12th birthday when my father remarried, I suffered from loss of sleep, headaches, stomach problems, lack of appetite, weight loss, inability to focus, isolation. I excelled in school and set out to skip another grade. I went to Haiti twice with my teacher nuns and became obsessed with their missionary work. I turned toward my grandmother Lolita and fantasized of becoming the diplomatic version of her. I took on my new little sisters Diana and Miri as my own children. When I met the man who became my master, I had been an overachiever, having dealt with my terrors and low self-esteem through total immersion in the acts and aids of others. And I had fallen prey to their wishes. I lived up to expectations in order to not lose protection and love. I easily embedded myself in the powers of others. As for him, his powers were my weakness, his truth my lies, his courage to be free was my cowardice as a woman. As a 15-year-old college freshman, 7 years after my mother's death, buying books on adoption in the Syracuse University bookstore, I was finding refuge in fantasies of mothering. In the face of paralysis, my maternal desire surfaced to ward off any awareness of distress. Those first college months are the first recollection I have of actively avoiding the void before me with mothering, imparting my capacity to mother with power and agency. I was also fashioning that capacity as both avoidance and face-off, as flight and as return. I would only need to become sexually active and have an abortion within the year for my body to get a taste of the drama of life and death it would come to crave. My story is a perversion of both maternal desire and abortion, framed by a lawful procedure that I abused. My first pregnancy was a result of lying about birth control. He was inside of me when he asked, "You're protecting yourself, aren't you?" Later, I would take my pills and skip a day, a few, and often give up on the whole month, promising myself I would do better the next time. Not knowing how a pill or a handful of them would affect my fertility, my days took on a balancing act, and a high of sorts accompanied me the days before my period was due. Half my pregnancies with him occurred during our first 3 years together. Each time I got my period, I was sad. Each time I discovered I was pregnant, I was aroused and afraid. Every pregnancy was a house of mirrors I entered and lost myself in, numb to the realities of a fetus, partner's wishes, and the impossible motherhood I was fashioning. I never craved that moment when I clenched my vibrating abdomen, feet high up on cold stirrups, and told myself never again. There was no high that came with that. My mood-altering experience was a shapeshifter. At times the high took place before pregnancy, waiting for a missed period, my body basking in the promise of being in control. At other times it was the pregnancy itself, the control I embodied only for a couple of months, and still other times it was leaving the abortion clinic, feeling that once again I had succeeded in a narrow escape. The time of my trauma was my time, no one could interrupt it, and what was more important, I could not interrupt it to meet others' needs. Feelings of inadequacy, helplessness, and disorder faded in the face of the possibilities of a reproductive body. An excitement, hyperarousal, almost euphoria surrounded my maternal desire. The craving gave structure to the confusing morass of events that made up my life. I would visit Marshall's and put infant clothes on layaway. I would start a diary. I would daydream about holding a baby girl and teaching her the alphabet. I would lie in the bathtub with a smile on my face, knowing that only I knew. Tension would gradually build as my pregnant body crowded out all other things and emotions. After a few weeks, stress would set in and grow more acute by the day and with the physical changes in me. I would go in and out of denial. At times I would forget I was pregnant. Other times I would think of nothing else. I would stop eating. By the time I lay in an abortion clinic waiting for the procedure to begin, I would feel nothing but disgust and shame. When I left the clinic, I felt a calm respite, surrender. I always said to myself, then, this has to end. It was a violent, intensely emotional drama that kept me from feeling alone. A moment came when not being pregnant was enough motivation for wanting to be pregnant. The fantasy subsided. Soon it was no longer about the control I had craved before. Getting pregnant began to be simply a habit. If I wasn't pregnant, something was wrong, more wrong than what was already wrong. I believe this habit formed with abortion number 9 and pregnancy number 10, shortly after I returned from Miguel's funeral. Miguel is my brother. I didn't want anything to do with my husband or the pregnancy or myself. I overdosed and woke up in a hospital. I needed another self-injury to get the high. I can't think about my mother and in general Puerto Rican women without thinking about choice. The language of choice invokes free will based on individual freedom, obscuring the dynamics between social constraints and human activity. Choices are framed by larger institutional structures and ideological messages. While population growth has been blamed for Puerto Rico's widespread poverty, other causes such as American exploitation were ignored or covered up. The 1967 NBA winner for nonfiction La Vida by Oscar Lewis reiterated the views of U.S. social scientists in turning fertility and reproduction into the source of the Puerto Rican problem. The Puerto Rican mother was either victimized by her macho husband and countless children longing to be rescued from her own ignorance, or a relentless, dangerous mating machine that needed to be stopped. Throughout my mother's childbearing years, from 1955 to 1969, Puerto Rico was a human laboratory for the development of birth control technology and population control policies. Pills 20 times stronger than those used today, with dangerous systemic side effects, including sterility, were tested on women by the U.S. government, which was simultaneously studying the long-term effects of secondary syphilis on a group of African-American men in Tuskegee without treating them for the disease. In 1968, women in Puerto Rico were more than 10 times more likely to be sterilized than were women in the United States. By 1974, 37% of Puerto Rican women of childbearing age had been permanently sterilized. In my small town of Barceloneta, 25,000 women were sterilized between 1955 and 1975. By 1980, Puerto Rico had the highest per capita rate of sterilization in the world. My mother was 16 when she gave birth to Fonso in January 1956. In April, she became pregnant with Cheo and gave birth in October to a 6-month preemie. Shortly after that, she began using Eno, the controversial 10 milligram birth control pill. In September 1961, after the birth of my brother Miguel, the public hospital staff threatened not to provide care if she did not consent to a tube ligation. 8 years later, my mother's tubes tubes came untied and I was conceived. In 1974, when a pap smear showed non-malignant abnormal cell growth, the doctor recommended a hysterectomy. My mother was in home without a reproductive system and no hormonal treatment. She was 33 years old. Most of the conscious memories I have of my mother belong to the time after her hysterectomy. Depression and mood swings fastening her to a chair or sending her away in the middle of the night. Migraines curled her blood-clotted body in bed. Irritability slapped at her for asking a question. Bloating and fat gain in the hips and thighs shamed her in the mirror. While growing up poor and an orphan, the daughter of a woman in prison in the United States and being the wife for 23 years of a man unable to value her could not do, the U.S. mass sterilization program and its racist population control ideologies did. Self-medicating with Valium and acting out a ransacked, frantic, vacant sexuality, my mother came undone while I watched. The solutions my grandmother and my mother crafted for the impotence had romanticism and Marx's defined phrase, "I am nothing and should be everything," inherent in them. Both strived in their own ways for larger realities that would give them self-validation. I could not stand alone and reach out for support in motherhood. After all, I grew up in a family informed by the romantic narrative of Albizu Campos. Quote, "The brazeness of the Yankee invaders has reached the extremes of trying to profane Puerto Rican motherhood, of trying to invade the very insides of nationality," unquote. I used to believe that I was a happy child who had the misfortune of watching a mother die. The repeat abortions were symptoms of recklessness, low self-esteem, at times related to depressive states. I was as numb toward them as I was towards my mother's suicide. Only when I shocked myself by saying I'm an abortion addict was I forced to think of myself as a trauma. Trauma is an affliction of the powerless, telling us that we are unable to affect the outcome of our own lives. Sudden, uncontrollable behavior is an essential part of the development of post-traumatic stress. When my mother opened the door of the small Mazda my father was driving on our way home from my brother Cheo's wedding, I called out "Mommy," and I remember the hard pull of her shoulder in my hand as I reached out. But abandonment began much earlier than her death. There are fragmented memories of waiting alone in deserted parking lots, beaches, smelly hallways, motels, my own bedroom. In all these memories, I am waiting for my mother to come back. I had no control over my mother's decision to abandon me, but I had control over my body. I could impregnate myself and abort. No one else could control my fate when I showed such strange ownership. Repeat abortions remembered an element of the experience of death and abandonment. If my mother chose death over me, I chose to tell the story 15 terrifying times. When I jump to the last paragraph. I have been called a survivor, but truly I wasn't one. I was a deluded creature in suspended animation. Survival is a phenomenon of consciousness, a discovery of oneself as a tenacious entity. I was not a survivor until I overcame my fear of mothering the child in my womb. It was halfway through my 16th pregnancy that I found peace with my maternal desire and fell in love with my situation and the future gestating in me. My daughter Loretta May became the coherence emerging from the shameful mass of 35 years. On one side of my bathroom mirror, there are several pictures of my daughter Loretta May. In one, she's inside an incubator, a few minutes old, turned sideways towards the camera, eyes wide open, left hand stretched out on her cheek. In a second, she's sitting with my help on a picnic table, staring out at the sea. In a third, both she and I are asleep, and her little 3-month-old head is nestled in the crook of my arm. Through all the changes that these pictures preserve, my daughter remains the same little girl. On the other side of my bathroom mirror, I keep a picture of Loretta taken December 22nd, 2003, 18 weeks before she was born. The ultrasound images show clearly a miniature head tilted back, an arm raised up, with a hand pointing back towards the face. It would have been possible and permissible to end her life at this point. Thank you. Bearing with my voice and with this material. I feel very privileged that you would even listen to it.
Why did you write this work? Why did you produce this work?
Because I'm a writer and I have a good story to tell, I believe, an important, relevant story. I'm a writer that suffered from a very serious pathology, and I broke the cycle. And in breaking the cycle, there was a transformation, a healing, a learning process, a testimony that I felt was empowering. And the more I talked to friends, my best friends from childhood, I was amazed to discover that many of them had repeat abortions. And I only knew of one, two max. Two of my best friends had 5 and 6, and I didn't know. And I began to suspect that this was much more common than it's really not talked about. And like I say, it's very difficult for a woman to recognize herself in my pathology. This is an extreme case. And I really went very deep in trying to go into the grotesque aspects of the pathology. But I think that sometimes exaggerations and extremes are privilege, parenthesis of understanding is, there's an elasticity to that extreme that allows for new points of views that are usually not in place when you look at things in a more black and white. And so, but I think essentially began with the need to write as a writer. That was my material.
No, I'll just jump in and say, abortion is a dirty little secret that even feminists don't often contend with. And it's only by the telling of these stories and by the listening and sharing of these experiences that we can really begin to understand and get at and work away at the larger issues, that both compound and increase abortion and victimize the woman and criminalize these acts. So I think it's just a slow unraveling that we have to do continuously, not only here but across the world.
would you say the writing itself was part of the process of healing? Was it a way also of you, the writing itself, was it a way of becoming conscious of certain memories or parts of you that maybe you weren't fully conscious just in the process of writing this?
I think that transformation is at the heart of writing memoirs. And there's an element of transformation as you write it. If it happens before or after doing, that's very, I'm not even very sure of how that happens. It's more like a happening. But that transformation is at the heart, at the center of memoirs. We write in the history of memoir and in first-person narratives. There is an attempt to understand or give account to the personal and historical motivations of our actions. And that's what I do. I just really try to emphasize a lot the political aspects of my unconscious motivations, because I feel they were there. And I was guided by my anger of losing my mother to this, and the realization that I acted out very terrible and neurotic liberation strategies. I have so many friends that act out their own false liberation strategies. They're small and not my extremes. So again, it's difficult to identify with such an extreme, but I think many women would take bits and pieces. Like there's so many reasons why there are repeat abortions. What I hope, and my intuition is that there's a segment of the repeat abortions that women belonging to that segment will identify with the process of forgetting your pill over and over again. And what are the unconscious motivations going for forgetting? We put it next to our toothbrush. We don't forget to wash our teeth. But we do skip a pill or two. I'm saying that this is not all of them, but there is a group, and I hope we will have a discussion about why is this.
So is this like, okay.
The high.
There's one still in.
A few.
When you went for the procedures, if you gave a history of having had prior abortions, how did the staff, the provider treated you? What sort of advice did they give you?
I often lied.
Because of the shame involved.
Yes.
Yes.
I usually went backwards in numbers. When we vetted the manuscript went through the lawyers, and we had to authenticate everything. I was mesmerized by my lives and how they were going. The numbers were sort of receding. Like towards the end, I said I had like 5.
I was wondering if the professor has reacted to your book. It's a two-part question. And secondly, if you've thought a lot about what the 50-year-old man was doing, looking for love or sex with the 16-year-old, and has that thinking about that changed?
If I had given thought to his motivation, his own, no, I was too busy becoming accountable myself.
Yeah.
I think that I don't feel that's my territory. I don't think it's fair to him, nor fair to the relationship. As far as I know, I recruited him.
Mm-hmm.
I submitted him to my own. I actively used him as, and so there might be hints here and there, but the book, I made a conscious effort not to do that.
But again, I think we have to look at a society where it's okay for a 50-year-old professor to have a relationship with a 16-year-old student. Certainly if that was the reverse, there'd be a huge outcry.
Yes.
So, although that's
a
personal,
discussion that comes from reading, and that's what I wanted that to happen afterwards. But I didn't want to be the one.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Because I think it's a blame game. But
Yeah, but that's statutory right in the United States. 50-year-old man for 16.
well,
we
we didn't.
certainly is.
Maybe not in other places like in other countries, but in this country.
Let me make that clear that we didn't have relationship. We met at 16 and the romance sort of began then, but we did not live together until I was 18. First abortion was not until I was 18.
And I think it's also indicative then of how, difficult it really is to separate all of those structural issues from the personal lived experiences of individuals. Which is why, again, I think this book is so important because it forces us to confront these issues directly. We often don't like to talk about things like this, but it's so important that we do because until we do, we can't begin to chip away at all of those underlying structures that makes it okay for a 50-year-old to date a 16-year-old or 18-year-old or whatever it is.
I'll let you do it because I feel guilty given
I'll-
my history.
I'll front for you. Sorry,
I'm not sure if this is a question or a comment, but I've read The Ladies Gallery probably about 7 times, and I've and I've tried, and it's often when I'm reading it, I've taught it in women's studies, I've taught it in Puerto Rican literature classes, and and it's hard to get, or near impossible to get Mensaje de Dios in the Spanish translation. So the English is almost the original at this point. And one of the Spanish and then one of the tensions that I love in it, what I think is the richest, you talked about choice, and in the Puerto Rican context, what is choice is irrelevant, sort of politically. You choose, but it doesn't matter. You vote, and it doesn't matter.
You mean in terms of political?
Yeah, and within the colonial context, and I love there's a section in it called the miscarriage. And one of the tensions that I love is that when I try to reconstruct the text in Spanish, which I know you shouldn't do, but I do, el aborto is just as much the abortion as it is the miscarriage, which I think in the English translation, which I love that it's also called the miscarriage, and in it.
So interesting. I've never thought about that. That's very interesting.
And in that passage, you immediately go to talk about how you took a bunch of pills to end up in the hospital.
So
And so there's that tension
in
between
English.
agents, like where you almost can't ask of the text, this sort of, or the Puerto Rican woman, to have that agency. When I saw this book coming out about abortion in English, it's already so about choice and will, and I wondered if maybe that's the point. Is it about finally a choice is made, or do you think there's that same? I don't know if I'm wording this question right. Is that same tension there in these abortions? There was choice. I don't even know if I
I
can.
understand everything you're saying, and I love
That
it.
there's
Just
this
trying to
tension of
understand.
will in an aborto. There's this miscarriage and an abortion are synonymous. And is that the case here? Do you think?
No.
Thinking about it, or is this more?
Yeah,
And
it's-
did you write this in action? And did you write? Was this written in Spanish
This
and
is my,
translated, or?
this is my cross. It's in English.
Okay.
And Corina is my editor, who I owe her the world. She helped me a lot with my Spanish contamination in the writing. So, okay. These, the latest gallery now, there's a new edition. And it has an introduction. The introduction by me, by Carly Romano, a critic, and it's all about the fact, these books sort of deconstructs first memoir, deconstructs memory and the versions we have of ourselves, and that scene, that book ends with a scene that is a miscarriage, and you would think that I was using miscarriage as an euphemism, but also as that sort of ambivalence terms that coming from the Spanish to the English. But it was actually true. It refers to the second pregnancy, which in this book it was an actual miscarriage. that it was self-induced with an overdose. So again, it's lies by omissions. It's a very ambivalent and impartial. Sure, that's why I say that memoir is true, but it could have been truer. This one goes and really deconstructs that scene in chapter 6 or something. It actually takes that scene and breaks it down. So you brought it up, yeah.
Jim.
Oh yeah, I just have a question, kind of like a personal. Since it's such a like rich and profound like your story, would you want like your daughter to get her hands like on the book and like read it? And how would you go about it? Like
When they grow up.
when she
Yes. Yeah, of course. You know, in part, I was motivated and driven by. Once I became a mother, I felt that I had this story and that I needed to shield them from my story, from my history. And writing this book was my way of doing that. You know, another reason for writing the story. Not the main one, but just one of those, you know, side stories was my attempt of giving them a testimonial, you know, of that great mother went through.
I have not read the book yet, although I'm very much looking forward to it. But my suspicion is that by the end of the book, I'm going to be somewhat frustrated at finishing and having absolutely no insight into, I guess it was a professor, into this professor who was, your husband or not. Is there any part of the book that gives any insight into a little bit about what he was like, or?
I would hope so. Yes, I try to give a testimony of the relationship, not an interpretation. But I think that there's a whole touch of him and his own history, where he comes from. Bobby Morgan really well into that history because he really comes across as this rebel. You know, he was a survivor of a dictatorship in Argentina. A man with very set ideas of what was right and wrong, and I sort of lived my rebellion through his. I idealized him. So there's a whole testimony of my own fascination with him. Why? From my own account of perhaps why I was fascinated with him. So you do get a picture of him, and then it's up to you to make conclusions.
Good question. The other thing I'd react to is your comment where you said where it's okay for a 16-year-old or a 50-year-old man to be having a relationship with a 16-year-old girl. And I'm not sure to know that. Okay, according to what? Okay, that he wasn't prosecuted, or I'm not sure that it's okay.
I think oftentimes, I think it's beginning to change, but I think often it's a case of wink, wink, nod, nod. You know, there are a lot of relationships with large age disparities between them, and I think, you know, in certain cases they are okay if both of those people come to those relationships as, you know, sort of mature, complete human beings when they start. But I think often that's not the case. And, you know, as I pointed out, what we tend to do is overlook the cases of those relationships built on large income or large age disparities, sometimes income as well. When it's the man who is older, we certainly don't give a wink, wink, nod, nod quite as easily when it's the reverse, when there's, you know, an older woman with a very younger man.
Yeah, but that's that's the difference is here you got a 15, 16-year-old girl. You don't have a 50-year-old man with a 20-year-old girl. And clearly it's an asymmetrical power relationship.
Wait a second, you guys are making me younger and younger. I was older and more accountable.
But it's an asymmetrical power relationship.
We immediately tried to make it, you know, right and wrong.
And the man has 50 years of experience compared to how many years of adolescent experience, 4, 3. I mean, to me, the hero, the Argentinian hero, played on you.
Oh,
That's what it
absolutely.
sounds like.
I think
But
Irene
I
is very
think-
generous in her portrayal. Yeah, that's what I would say. But that's my perspective as a reader. I wouldn't dare to put my words in her mouth, but I do think she's very generous with him and gives him every occasion to perhaps. She gives him every opportunity to take a higher road, I think.
Is he the father of your daughter?
No. I know children. You didn't want any children.
I think, if I may make a comment, and maybe you can comment on that, is that I appreciate your taking responsibility, even as a young woman, for your actions and your body and your sexuality and all that. I do agree with you also, it's a very wide power disparity and experience disparity and all that. But I do appreciate that you're trying to. And my question is that part of your healing and your overcoming the experiences of the abortion and your sexuality? Would you say that taking responsibility is just part of that process? And so that you tend to minimize a little bit. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but it seems to me that you're confronting your own demons, and by taking that responsibility. And if I were in a court, I will then attribute, percent of responsibility, so to speak. It's equal, both parties, and so forth. And you take 100%.
I think it's a control issue, to tell you the truth. In a way, I say this is a book about, a testimony of a control addict, really, too. It's a beautiful question, and I'm going to do a little circle here.
Okay.
Okay, I grew up with a depressed woman, right, who had been sterilized by an American med experiment. I grew up with an invisible monster inside my house. Whenever my mother was not emotionally available, it was because of la operación. We would sit at the dinner table and she was moody. It was because la vaciaron. Everything was because this thing that had happened to her when I was like 3 or 4. I was never given any details, but I knew that there was this thing, physical ailment. That was the reason why she couldn't give me a sister, because I always said, I want to have a sister. Oh no, no la operación. But I never gave it any thought, Then, this woman, was depressed. She lived with she was the daughter of a woman, political martyr, who chose public myth-making over motherhood. That's her choice. She was a wife of a man that could not value her, my father, who I adore, and who, by the way, is an unbelievable person in the sense of owning the story. He's read both books, and both times have really owned. I feel I had an ethical responsibility towards him, because no matter what he had going on with mother, between him and me, he was there for me at important times. So I was willing to not publish this if he had something to say. I did not feel the same with Lolita. I did not feel an ethical responsibility with her, because she did not give up anything for me. She did it for the country, which is fine and valuable. So the country has ethical responsibility with me, but I'm not the country, I'm Irene. That I choose to say that. So if she read this and said no, I would still publish it. So I had to make all those choices. I went another way. But what I mean is, so my mother was this thing, the daughter of her mother, the wife of this man, and the victim of this horrible colonial project. So when my mother finally dies, and a few years later, I'm obsessively filling out applications to leave to go to America, and everybody's telling me, you're only 15, why are you going there? Stay here, I go to the UP, then transfer. I was obsessed. I was with a dictionary writing all these essays. As I look back, I didn't know that consciously, but as I look back, I was obsessed with escaping. I wanted out. Why? I wanted control for my fate, my sexuality, my life. I wanted to call the shots. I was a rebellious adolescent. Just that I was taken all away into pathology. That was the beginning of my obsession with control. When you're a survivor, when a mother kills herself in front of you, you have no control. And there are many things you can do with that. Some people might even survive it fine. But some might become depressed, anorexic, whatever, masochistic. I became control obsessed. I could not trust. I had to be in control. And I think that part of my feeling so obsessed with wanting to own this story is because I have some residue of my control issue. I don't want to give him. He can own his story, and I try not to excuse him. I think that there are parts here where he comes out as horrifying. A lot of people have told me what a horrifying character. But other people have told me, but Tamara, you could have gone more. You were. But I think what I did was ultimately I said to myself, I escaped from Puerto Rico. I came here within 2 years. I choose a man who exercised ultimate control of my sexuality, and who considered that a woman, in order to be free, should be sterile. Talk about reproducing the empire. Talk about reproducing your nation. Talk about your body becoming really a testimony of how history speaks through us. I don't say that to excuse my actions, but you see, it's a very fine line of saying context is crucial, and yet we still call the shots. And I think there's something empowering that can offer a young woman is to be able to walk that fine line and do that balancing act of finding context and yet owning our actions. And I think by me owning my actions and undermining a little bit his own accountability, I am pushing the control issue. And I think that ultimately that is liberating.
As a controller, you're starting your subjectivity and your perception and the way you are passing judgment over the world and your life and his life with you. Isn't it more an assertion of your subjectivity that is really the subject here? That it's an assertion of that over his subjectivity, because
yes.
we're always really perceiving ourselves through the other, and usually the other is the male other to his gaze. And it's really, I mean, I think from what you're saying, you could say reducible to control, but it sounded more to me that it was really an assertion of your own subjectivity.
Of remaining within my subjectivity. I like that too, yes.
And a process, I think, of reclaiming herself.
Yeah.
She'd given up for so much. She'd given up so much for so long that I read this book more as I won't.
But yeah, I mean, I was just using like book
What happens is that
really.
I always like to. It is that, but I don't want to romanticize my own search. I think that there is a little bit of control, of keeping this story in mind started too. And I think it's part of my makeup.
So how did you break the cycle? How did you get out of this?
Intensive therapy, but I chose to do it. I chose to do the therapy, and I think I was able to finally commit to therapy because other important things happened in my life. I think the book has a whole chapter on sailing. Sailing was very, very empowering. It was an experience of agency and power that it was as an 18, 19-year-old, my first experience in resilience, in actual physical resilience. And there was such a nobility, such an agency. Was independent of my sexuality, independent of my history, my mother, my wounds. It was, and the book goes into other examples of experiences with nature that took place in this country. Going to school in the first book, my experience with pastoral life, with the utopian Whitman side of this country. And these angelic mentors that I had, 3 or 4 of them, that really modeled this intelligence and this alternative to power and control that was outside my body. And so saving was one thing, big thing, and that led me to other experience, gave me the courage to face other things, that gave me the courage to face other things, finally coming to therapy, which was the ultimate sorting through the pathology and addiction. Mm-hmm.